Welcome everyone who's joining. We're having the live streams populate. Please stand by for the beginning of our news conference. We can end COVID-19 and save lives through vaccines. You'll be hearing from faith leaders from around the world. And if you have questions, please use the question and answer function in Zoom to start posting those. They will populate live and our speakers will be answering them at the end of their presentations. Thank you all for joining. We'll be going live in just a minute. Welcome to the news conference.
We are live everywhere, Adam. We're good to go.
Right. Well, welcome. I'm grateful for all those that are watching through the live stream. Any of you that are journalists, we welcome you. Those that are religious leaders and those that simply care deeply about ensuring that everyone across the world can have access to often life-saving vaccines. We are here together as religious leaders who have united around a statement that is being released today. And we have a group of very diverse religious leaders from different corners of the world that will be speaking about the details of that statement. But I want to, as the moderator, I introduce myself again, Reverend Adam Taylor. I am the president of Sojourners. We are a Christian peace and justice organization that works to mobilize people of faith to put their faith into action for justice. Couldn't think of a more critical and important reason for us to come together in a virtual press conference than to communicate very, very clearly and persuasively that we are in an inflection moment when it comes to this COVID pandemic and crisis. We're in an inflection moment in part because we have the tools to effectively address this crisis. And what is so often missing is the political, social, and moral will. Almost 2 years after its emergence and after it upended so much of our life together as humanity, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to rage across many parts of the world. The pandemic itself has taken the lives of 5 million people. Each and every one of them is a life that is sacred. And every loss creates a ripple effect of grief and of mourning and of communities and families that are being impacted and in many cases devastated. We believe from a faith perspective that every single one of those losses breaks the heart of God. And so it also breaks our hearts, knowing that we have so many of the tools to prevent this calamity from getting so much worse. And we have the tools to be able to address it right now. 115 organizations representing 5 of the world's faith traditions and a very diverse and broad cross-section of faith leaders today are calling on the World Trade Organization member countries to act before the year's end to waive the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights rules. We are here to express our grave concern about the year-long delay in approving the temporary TRIPS waiver at the World Trade Organization. Because we know and we believe that waiving intellectual property rights would remove a critical barrier to enable the widespread manufacturing of vaccines on a scale that is needed to address the pandemic, to lower costs, and to ensure equal access. And so today, these faith-based organizations and religious leaders join South Africa and India and more than 100 countries in calling for the immediate approval of this TRIPS waiver. We're here to share with you both the practical imperative, certainly amplified and exacerbated by the Omicron variant, that we must do more to increase vaccine access, particularly in low-income countries where currently only 6% of people have access to the vaccine or have been able to acquire the vaccine. That is the equivalent of what many are describing as a system of vaccine apartheid, where so many are being shut out, particularly in countries in the global south. But we're also here because of a moral imperative. Dr. Martin Luther King famously said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in the context of a global pandemic, that means that infection anywhere is a threat to infection everywhere. It means that none of us are safe until all of us are safe. And we believe that at the heart of our faith traditions is a commitment and a requirement to care for and protect the most vulnerable in our midst and around the world, and a belief in the inherent dignity and worth of every single person. This commitment to human dignity lies at the very heart of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, is at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, and it's at the heart of our faith traditions. And it is why you will hear from faith leaders from various traditions share with you why we need this TRIPS waiver now. And so I want to quickly turn it over to our panel. You're going to hear from a number of faith leaders. I'm going to introduce them individually, and then they'll speak. First, you're going to hear from Imam Safet Abid, who has been a long time U.S. Muslim community organizer and activist and environmental leader. He is a core member of the Parliament of the World's Religions Climate Action Task Force and has been appointed to head the Islamic Society of North America's Office of Interfaith and Community Alliances and Government Relations here in Washington, D.C. Imam, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Adam, and thank all of you for being here today. It's a blessing and an honor to be with you all. Let me begin by saying Assalamu alaikum, Shalom alaikum, Pax vobiscum, Namaste, Shante, the myriad of ways in which we greet each other with peace. The understanding of peace from the Islamic tradition, or from the words Assalamu alaikum, is that there can be no peace without security. And there can be no security without justice and equity, adli wal ihsan. And that this must be made widely available throughout society, across all sectors, across all social classes, in order to secure maslahah, the common good and the public welfare. The noble goals of the Sharia, Islam's sacred law and teachings, include hifzul nafs, the preservation and protection of life. The good news, dear sisters and brothers, in the horrors of this global pandemic of COVID that we are in the midst of, that has killed so many and has caused the suffering and long-term effects on so many more, including, of course, the families and the loved ones of those who have passed, is that we have the means of preserving and protecting life, owing to the persistent work of our scientists, researchers, and medical experts. We have the vaccine that can bring about a cure, provided we reach what is called herd immunity, meaning the overwhelming majority of human beings on this planet, our brothers and sisters in humanity, must be vaccinated. And this cannot be realistically done in the short term unless the production of the vaccine is done on a global scale, as called for in our letter on vaccine equity. Kifaya, enough is enough of putting profits over people because it is killing us. To state the obvious, we are so interconnected in so many ways, like never before in human history. We in fact live in a global village, and it takes the whole village, as the African proverb goes, to secure life and well-being of all of us and our children and our children's children. Where we live or what are our zip codes, as is the case here in the United States, will not suffice in protecting us. Only by following the golden rule, which is said many ways in many traditions and spiritualities. In the Islamic tradition, none of you is true to your faith unless he or she desires for himself or herself what he or she desires for his brother or his sister in our human family. We desire life. We have a cure. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, Ya ibadallah tadawaw. O servants of God, and in another narration, Ya ayyuhan nas tadawaw. O human beings, seek the treatment, for there is no disease that God has created except that he has created its treatment. Therefore, seek out the treatment. We have the treatment, dear sisters and brothers. We need the will and the action by the WTO to ensure that it goes to everyone who needs it through mass production around the world so that we all may live. Salam, peace.
Thank you, Imam Savet. Next, you're going to be hearing from Dr. Azza Karam. Dr. Karam serves as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, which is the largest and oldest international multi-religious leadership platform with national and regional interreligious councils in over 90 countries. She has been a longtime champion for human development and for human rights, and we're so grateful that she's with us right now. Over to you, Dr. Karam.
Thank you, Reverend Taylor. I just want to say a couple of very brief points. The first and foremost is that it is actually a privilege for us to be part as Religions for Peace International. And I have my colleague, Ms. Huma Kashif here from Pakistan. It is a privilege for us to be standing alongside and part of this process. And I want to especially thank the Friends and for their work that they have done in stewarding this process. I think it's very important to mention that this is a global pandemic that we're all facing here. So let me quote the UN Secretary General for a second, when he declared in July something that very much confirms and affirms what we've heard from our two religious leaders thus far, that vaccine equity, said the UN Secretary General, is the greatest immediate moral test of our times. We know that the COVID-19 vaccines developed over the past year are in fact safe and effective for the majority, but for much of the world's population, they remain inaccessible. It is incomprehensible that less than 1% of the more than 6 billion doses administered thus far have actually gone to people in low-income countries. For instance, Africa is home to 17.5% of the global population, but accounts for just 2% of globally administered vaccines. The fact is that the problem starts with a shortage of doses supplied by wealthier countries. COVAX has only received enough pledged doses to inoculate 20% of the world's population. Earlier on, the WHO made it very, very clear in a statement that nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. We all know that this vaccine will continue to mutate unless and until it is effectively, we all know that the COVID virus will continue to mutate unless and until we are all safe and vaccinated. And we know that even when we are each and all vaccinated, which is a journey so far, we will still need to try to take precautionary measures to stay safe. One of the most ridiculous things I've been listening to recently is an advocacy by some that we could probably not necessarily give the vaccine to countries who need it because we're not sure that they can actually use it and administer it to their populations. My answer to that is our moral obligation, our political obligation, our financial obligation, and our social obligation, first and foremost, as people of faith and none, is to ensure that there is sufficient vaccines for every single person in this world. And as to whether or not it will be used or used effectively, that is not something that should prevent us from sharing the healing as of this moment. If rich countries donated more of their surplus doses, far more lives could be saved, and that's a fact. What we need to realize is this confluence, as the statement that we're talking about here today indicates. There's a confluence between discrimination at a global level, between racism, between prejudice, and the lack of access to vaccines. And that confluence is something that very few people want to speak to openly. But as people of faith, we are obligated to speak to this confluence of discrimination and lack of access to basic protection, especially when that protection exists. The HIV/AIDS, the Ebola have all shown us that some of the worst killers of human beings can be prevented because we have the medicines, because we have the means at hand. There is absolutely no reason not to ensure that the TRIPS waiver is implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karam. Important reminder that we are truly in a race against time. I want to turn it next to Father Charles Chulufya. He is the coordinator of the Africa Task Force of the Vatican COVID-19 Commission. He is a Jesuit priest working in Africa and Madagascar as the director of JCAM, the Justice and Ecology Office, since 2018. Father?
Thank you very much. We have seen since Omicron COVID-19 variant that the world is not okay. It's not just the unvaccinated Africa and other low-income countries that are not okay. It is the entire world of both the vaccinated and unvaccinated. It is on fire. Omicron has shown us that whether we like it or not, we will not eradicate the coronavirus unless we learn how to care for each other and ensure justice and good health for all and get everyone vaccinated. The virus is exposing our incapacity for concern for one another, for compassion and for justice. But the good news is that if we really, really reflect and listen to our hearts and search for what is true, what is noble, what is praiseworthy, what is human, and what it means to live in this world, as the Christian scriptures say, we will find space in our hearts, both the richer and poorer, to care for one another and to do all we can to heal the world. I speak to all those who have means and resources to make a difference. There is space in your heart. Find it. Please find it. I echo the words of Michael Jackson in his powerful piece, Heal the World, and I reiterate them to you world leaders, to you pharmaceutical companies, and to you rich nations. I speak them to your heart and call you to listen to them in the silence of your heart. Open your hearts and listen with compassion and concern. There is a place in your heart, and I know that it is love, and this place is brighter than tomorrow. There are ways to get there. If you care for the living, make a little space. Make a better place. Heal the world. For you and for me, for the dying innocent children and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. Find a place in your heart and urgently do what you can. Address vaccine inequity amid the emergence of the Omicron COVID-19 variant. These knee-jerk responses of your governments to cut off travel from African countries has taken a lot of the attention from what is the real issue at hand and from what you are capable of doing. You can do it. Please open your hearts and heal the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. And I appreciate that you did emphasize, particularly at the end, these counterproductive and discriminatory travel policies that also are really not the solution. We're going to travel from Africa over to Pakistan. I'm grateful to introduce Huma Ikramullah, who is the Secretary General of Religions for Peace of Pakistan. Huma, you're on mute. Welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to reiterate the words of all the religious leaders who have joined us in supporting this cause, and especially our leader, Ms. Aza Karam, because Religions for Peace International and Religions for Peace Asia also supports the fact that everyone must get vaccinated. This is not only important for us, for ourselves, but also for our loved ones and for everybody around us. Because the fact is that getting vaccinated is not only a requirement of the countries for travel or for trade purposes, but as you know, that this new variant Omicron and COVID-19 has no boundaries. It doesn't recognize any sect, any religion, whether you are rich or poor, everyone gets affected. And for this, to counter this, we all must stand together. When we stand together, we have a better chance of fighting this variant. and of fighting all the variants of COVID-19. And the way to do is to get greater accessibility to the vaccines and all the medicines which are needed, not only for the rich people, but also for all the underdeveloped and poor nations of the world. Right now, vaccines are being donated, especially in countries like Pakistan, but we have very good pharmaceutical companies here. If the vaccine formula is made locally available, as is being propagated by this campaign, this media advisory, that we should have accessibility to the vaccine formula, that then more vaccines can be made, and then a lot of people can get vaccinated which are not vaccinated, especially now in the rural areas, people who have no accessibility and people who are at the grassroots level. Therefore, on behalf of all the faith communities of not only Asia, but all over the world, and the indigenous communities, and as human beings, we must come together on this great cause, because we have one purpose. We are one humanity, we stand together, and therefore we must support this cause. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it now to Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. She serves as a Senior Associate for Pan-African and Orthodox Church Engagement at Bread for the World.
And thank you, Reverend Taylor, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Bread for the World. COVID is a matter of faith, and yes, it is a hunger issue. On behalf of Bread for the World, it is an honor to speak to this timely moment relative to the urgency of hunger and poverty today. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased hunger significantly, with as many as 161 million additional people facing hunger in 2020 than a year before, as of September of this year. One reason is the sudden halt of most global economic activities, like going to work, as the world went into quarantine in the formal sector, as well as farmers, and I would say even others. The strains on the healthcare system also led to increased hunger and malnutrition. Resources had to be diverted from other health concerns to treating COVID patients. One result was that vital services for young children and pregnant women, such as vaccinations against childhood diseases and vitamin and mineral supplements, were unavailable to many. Many low and middle income countries simply do not have the resources to mount a response to the pandemic like the one seen in higher income countries, such as the United States. People have been left to cope with severe economic and health impacts on their own. Here again, the historic inequities lay bare and discriminatory practices revealed yet again. Equity means mutual access to healing resources, to God's gifts for all and with all. The TRIPSWaiver will remove a critical barrier to enabling widespread manufacturing of vaccines on a scale needed to quell the pandemic, lower costs, and ensure more equitable access. We joined South Africa, India, and more than 100 countries to call for its immediate approval. Our lives are intertwined. We are connected, Ubuntu. Making COVID-19 vaccines available to all should be regarded as part of a race to save all of humanity and not part of humanity. This is the humane and moral step to take without further delay. SDRs are also an important resource in this moment. COVID-19 vaccines treating children, again, with malnutrition, providing families with food packages, and establishing and extending social protection programs are critical resources for all of us. Therefore, Bread for the World joins in supporting the statement before us and looks forward to other opportunities to join the collective voices of faith and our partners in advocating with and for all. Amen and Ashe.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn to our final speaker, Dr. Pauline Mushina. First, I want to really thank American World Friends Service Committee and for their leadership in helping to pull together both this statement and this press conference, as well as Public Citizen. Dr. Mushina is the Africa representative in DC for AFSC and the chair of the COVID-19 Working Group at Advocacy Network for Africa.
Thank you so much, Adam, and every speaker, faith leader who has spoken. And actually, thanks goes to more than the American Friends Services Committee. There is Network Lobby and many others that have done significant work on this. And so I just want to start by saying thank you to everybody, public citizens, Adam for moderating, and all our speakers for speaking today, and to those who have joined us to listen to what is happening with this. The statement is being delivered to the World Trade Organization by the World Council of Churches in Geneva. And we also want to thank them for doing that on our behalf, because they are based in Geneva. And to say that, you know, the faith community has been working on COVID in various ways. As you know, the faith community is in every level of our communities, and they are at the forefront, on the forefront of this pandemic. So they are the ones who are dealing with families, with individuals who are either suffering or losing loved ones, people who are also suffering from hunger because of the economic downturn. You know, there's so much that the religious community is dealing with. So you may see just a few of us here, but, you know, we're not claiming to represent everybody, but we do know that the faith community is crying out loud with all our voices, saying that this needs to end now. It doesn't need to wait. And the reason why it's taken this long is because of greed. You know, focusing on profits instead of focusing on human beings. So the pharmaceutical companies, you know, I actually wonder whether they run the world today instead of political leaders who are in charge of the world. Because now it looks like the pharmaceutical companies are calling the shots on who gets vaccines and who doesn't get vaccines, meaning who gets to live and who doesn't get to live. So where are the world leaders who believe in human rights, who believes in health, who should be pushing back on these pharmaceutical companies and say human lives come first, you know, profits come second? That's why the faith community is coming together today to call on the World Trade Organization, and really not just the World Trade Organization, but on global leaders, especially those who are blocking the TRIPSWaiver or the mass production of vaccines globally. So we want to give a shout to those who have supported it. South Africa and India, who actually presented the first proposal to get the TRIPSWaiver so that we can mass produce vaccines. Then we also want to challenge countries such as Germany, the UK, the Switzerland, and many others, Canada and others, that have refused to approve the TRIPSWaiver. And also we want to call on countries like the United States that said, yes, we are going to approve the we want to get the TRIPSWaiver approved, but have done very little to make that happen. So as the faith community, we are saying everybody who has committed to getting vaccines to everybody needs to walk the talk, rather than always saying, yes, we are doing this, and then sitting back and watching what is happening. There is no way the few pharmaceutical companies that exist can produce the vaccines needed for the entire world, 14 billion vaccines. You know, we know that some of these countries are already hoarding those vaccines and are not sharing them enough with everybody. but the production of the vaccine is also very low. And it's not only the vaccines, it is also treatment. You know, there is treatment for COVID, but it is not available to the majority of the world. It's available to rich countries, those who are able to get to the pharmaceutical companies fast and pay, you know, a lot of money, and hoarded those as well. So how much are they going to hoard? And as they hoard and as they refuse to approve the TRIPS waiver, guess what? The virus will keep mutating, and eventually it might undermine the vaccines that are already helping save lives in the global north. So today we join with the other faith leaders on behalf of American Friends Services Committee and also Advocacy Network for Africa. We want to say enough is enough, and we know that we can save billions of lives by approving the TRIPS waiver. So WTO, the chair of the General Council, and also the Director General of the World Trade Organization, we are calling on you to make sure that the TRIPS waiver for mass production of vaccines is approved before the end of this year, because waiting any further is allowing too many lives to be lost. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone, and we will continue advocating. We'll put the link to the statement on the chat, and we are very grateful that you have joined us today. Let us go out and save the world. That is what our faith tradition teaches us, and that's what we are calling for today. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've heard from a range of religious leaders who have spoken very prophetically and passionately about why it's not only a practical imperative, but a moral imperative to ensure vaccine access for all, not just for some, but for all. And a critical step in order to make that happen is to change this TRIPS waiver. I want to introduce quickly Lori Wallach, who serves as the Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. She's going to help to move us into a period of Q&A.
Thank you very much, Reverend Taylor, and it's an honor to join all of you today. I am going to just facilitate the question and answer session, and so if I may ask all of our inspiring faith leaders to turn your cameras and mics on, I am going to ask you to hop in and answer when you are so moved. And if we have a lineup and you want to get in when someone else is speaking, raise your hand. Folks, reporters, people who are watching live, you can send questions on the Q&A function of Zoom. First question is, it sounds like maybe a reporter who came in late. You sent a letter. To whom did that letter go? How many faith leaders signed it? And from what faiths and countries were they representing? Pauline, you're on mute.
Yes, so sorry. So the letter was sent to the chair of the General Council of the World Trade Organization, and also the Director General, of the World Trade Organization. And it was copied to all heads of delegation to the World Trade Organization. We got around, over 100, actually, I would say 112 organizations, but new ones have come since we sent the letter. So we've gotten even higher. So we are at 116, I think. So we are delighted, and many others would have signed it if they had either seen it or had time to do it. So, and we wanted to release it for Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day, which was Friday. So we are continuing with that tradition that today is still part of International Human Rights Day. And we are releasing it today. And it was delivered by the World Council of Churches in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a question for everyone. Do any of you have a view about why the waiver has not been agreed more than a year after it was proposed, and despite it having such wide support among WTO member countries, especially wondering what is the cause, given the WTO approved a service sector agreement 10 days ago, despite the ministerial of the WTO being postponed. Why is the waiver not a priority?
Anybody wants to take that, or should I do it? Okay, anyway, so there are many factors that we've been told are preventing the waiver from being passed. But we know that the primary fact is because the countries I just mentioned and also the European Union have not been supportive of this TRIPS waiver. So that's number one. Number two, to know that the WTO operates with consensus. So if there are countries that are blocking, they are not just refusing to approve the waiver, but they are actively blocking it. You know, like issuing statements and lobbying other countries to not do it. So those countries I mentioned, they, especially European Union countries, they are the ones who are preventing this from happening. To also remember that the corporate world, especially pharmaceutical companies, are very powerful. And we know that earlier on here, when we were advocating with President Biden, they actually sent a letter to President Biden, kind of calling him, telling him, do not approve the TRIPS waiver. So we know that the problem is not only within the WTO, but it is also coming from lobbies of the pharmaceutical companies. And that makes it very hard because they've spent billions of dollars preventing this from happening because of the profits that they are making right now from vaccines. If they keep the TRIPS, the monopoly of the vaccine, they will continue gaining more and more while people around the world keeps on dying. So that's why we are pushing back. Then, you know, you have to ask yourself, why in this world would governments refuse to approve something that can save lives? There is issue of racism that is in play. We have to call it what it is. We have seen vaccine apartheid happening. So that's the other thing. But I'm going to let the other speakers also jump in and respond, please.
Dr. Karam?
I actually just want to support and endorse what Dr. Pauline Monchina said, because I did mention, and she mentioned as well quite repeatedly, that the issue at stake here is greed, plain and simple. And also plain and simple, unfortunately, discrimination, where money and profit determine and dictate the terms of our engagement with one another. We've always ended up with one part of the world better off than another. This global inequality has hurt us all. As long as money and profit determine our relationships with one another, we will suffer. What is happening now is our entire planet is suffering. What we see happening with the environmental damage is exactly what is happening with this human public health damage. The issue here is really very straightforward, and we've been through this road before. We've been through this road with HIV and AIDS, when we needed to approve antiretroviral drugs to be produced outside of the ambit of the rich pharmaceutical companies making a tremendous profit off millions who were dying and left orphaned and left maimed by HIV. It is not unusual that we're here again. What is unusual and amazing is and intolerable is that we are here again. We should not be here. It is not that complicated. And that's precisely what is pushing faith leaders. And that's the tipping point that faith leaders need the role to play, which is to push back against that greed, just like they pushed back before. The point here is that we're looking at a civil society push for governments that is not necessarily always coordinated with a multi-religious approach. When all religious actors come together, there is no there is no limit. The sky is not the limit. When all religious actors come together, the sky is where we all live together, heaven. The problem here is that the civil society, secular civil society, is fighting on its own. Religions are fighting on their own. We're rarely coming together to confront together as a whole of civil society. So we can point fingers at the pharmaceuticals. We could name the greed. But at the end of the day, the rest of our hand, when we point fingers, the rest of the hand points towards ourselves. To what extent are we standing in solidarity as a global civil society space that pushes against those very same governments?
Thank you very much, Reverend Taylor.
That was extremely well said by Dr. Crom. I just want to underscore that our faith traditions have a lot to say about greed. In my Christian tradition, the love of money is the root of evil. And so I think we are speaking very clearly and passionately about the dangers of greed, in this case, at the cost of human life. We also reject some of these false choices that are often put into the debate that say we have to choose between intellectual property rights and choose between public health. Clearly, in a global pandemic, we need a TRIPS waiver in order to address a pandemic, and that does not have to come at the expense of long-term intellectual property rights. And then lastly, just really reinforce that it is true that the European Union nations have been the biggest stumbling block as of late, and we are working in concert with religious leaders in those countries as well to ensure that we lift up our voices together in order to make this happen.
And just to chime in quickly, can I, Lori?
Please.
Yeah. I would like to affirm what has been said, but also to note that this has been worsened by the fact that the greed that we are speaking about has been institutionalized into international laws that are making it difficult for the poor to access the goods of the world. After the fall of the curtain, of the Iron Curtain, when the northern countries had a chance and an opportunity to build a better world, they instituted laws, international laws that are hurting everyone else, especially those from the South. And this has become structural, what we call in the Catholic Church, structural sin, or whatever it is. It's sin that is no longer just by one human person, but it's embedded in the structures of society. So even if we want to make changes that are necessary to save lives, unless we deal with that, we won't be able to succeed. And that's a very sad part. And yet, the richer nations still have an opportunity to reform this global structural injustice into global justice that can give access to everyone, can give access to, in this case, medicines to everyone. And just to end by reiterating what the president of South Africa said a couple of days ago, he dismissed claims that Africa doesn't have capacity. He stated very clearly that African leaders don't want to receive a few pieces of medicines that they could distribute. Donations are good, but what they want is a TRIPS waiver so that they can be allowed to manufacture. And he reiterated that capacity is there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Charlie. And to that end, at tradewatch.org, you can see a fact sheet that is explaining that vaccine hesitancy is not the issue, that donations are not the answer, but rather with citations to what's actually been going on. No notice, just about to expire vaccines dumped in volume after months and months of no access. Structural problems created by the current system of not having production in the global South that can actually serve the global South, being at the source of this catastrophe. May I please ask Reverend Walker-Smith, you've been looking to get in on the conversation, and then we're going to go to Huma in Pakistan, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to affirm what all of the speakers have said, but I also want to go to what I think is part of the heart of the issue, is that we refuse globally to accept the gift of our mutuality, the gift of our interconnectedness, the gift of recognizing that we have a common humanity, This ideal is captured in the African term of Ubuntu. We fail to be mutually recognized to each other, as opposed to what we often do is offer a charitable response that gives something to, as opposed to coming alongside with. This is absolutely a moment where the exposure of all of our physicalities, all of our humanness is exposed to remind us that we are connected and that we are one common humanity. And our faith says that we should embrace it, and we should even move toward a vision of divinity that is moving beyond even our physicality. So my prayer is that we will receive the gifts of mutuality, shalom, justice, and a solidarity and accompaniment, as opposed to leaving our celebrations at moments of charity. And it is only in that moment where we will see things like TRIPSWaiver and other possibilities before us that support who all of us are as God's creation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Huma, please, Huma.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a different example and a different perspective where we are talking about pharmaceutical companies and the fact that, of course, because of the money which is being generated, that is why the formula is not being shared. But I would like to share with you an example of a company, pharmaceutical company in Pakistan, Nabi Qasim Pharmaceutical Industry, where I work as well. And that company made the antiviral drug Remdesivir for COVID vaccine. And the government fixed price for one injection was rupees 10,000, Pakistani rupees 10,000. However, our chief executive reduced that price for rupees 2,000 so that it has greater accessibility and people can get it cheaply. And those who did not have the money even to pay the 2,000 rupees, because it was an injection of a course of at least 7 to 10 injections, it was given free of cost to the people. So he told everybody that on this antiviral drug for COVID, you will not make a profit. They gave it to the people mostly free of cost and at very, very reduced prices so that people could get cured. And I'm talking about the value. Basically, they belong to a religious organization as well, and they're working with a religious organization. And their motive was that if we support and save lives, then we will be rewarded differently, not only in this world, but in the hereafter. And I'm telling you from fact that their sales went up in other areas, not in this, because they did it for humanity. They reduced the prices and gave it for free as well. So this policy can also be adopted by the other pharmaceutical companies. And I'm an example of this because I have proof of this and I've seen this working also. So this can be done by the other pharmaceuticals also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for all of our listeners to do the currency transaction, which I just did quickly. So right now, the Remdesivir course of treatment is in the US anyway, is about $2,300 per patient. Translating out the 10,000 Pakistani rupee to dollars, that's about $55. So the availability, even at the price charged without the donations, is representative of what happens when you don't have a monopoly and you're actually charging a price that is closer to representing what it may cost to make it, in addition to the blessings of giving it free to those who couldn't afford that. But the juxtaposition of 2,300 versus 55 is something that's worth noting. I'm sorry.
And Laurie, it was reduced to only 2,000 rupees, which is only around $10 per injection.
There you go.
From 55, it was reduced to $10 approximately.
It gives all of our, everyone who's joined, the notion of what the greed that our faith leaders are discussing translated into the legal institution of the WTO's mandated monopolies. So what did not come down from God is the notion that all the countries of the world should require a monopoly control by pharmaceutical companies. That is the will of men and women who wrote the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property, the TRIPS. So that's now imposed on countries. It's just one way of doing business. There is nothing like the moon's pull on the tides behind that. It is a human choice. So waiving that bad choice, the difference we will see is what is the price perhaps of what it costs to make that medicine versus the monopoly bounty that can be charged by greedy companies. The next question that has come in has to do with, I'm going to boil it down because it's a pretty long one, is basically the gist of it is President Biden seems to be a sincere man of faith. His Catholic faith is an important part of him and a guide to him. And so what is the role the US is playing? And do you have thoughts about how the US is or isn't able to make this happen, given the remarkable development of the US breaking as a country with years of Democratic and Republican presidents siding with pharma at the WTO to at least call for a waiver? But then why, with all the US power, has there not been a waiver, is what I would boil down that question to really getting at. If anyone has views about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think in my estimation, the Biden administration has not used all of its diplomatic tools and pressure, particularly with our European friends and allies, to be able to convince them and cajole them to approve this waiver. And so certainly much more can be done. It's hard, for us to be able to see everything that happens behind the scenes when it comes to diplomacy, but this has not necessarily been an issue that is as visible in terms of diplomacy as I think it could be. So more needs to be done, and certainly call upon the Biden administration to use some of its diplomatic soft power, but also some of its hard power, if you will, in order to convince our European allies to do this.
Thank you, Reverend Taylor. Dr. Karam?
Thank you. Just to say that I think this question brings up another very important point, which the statement that we're talking about here today actually directly addresses. We are not living in the same times as before. Times have changed dramatically. Our geopolitical space has changed dramatically and is changing dramatically as we speak. The United States is no longer the sole superpower that it used to be not so long ago. It is today part of a configuration of other powers. And because of that global tension between large militaristic regimes, we are seeing how the vulnerable can become even more vulnerable, because those who have the moral authority, perhaps, and not one single government today has that moral authority anymore, quite frankly. So we're talking about a time where the normal institutions as we know them are no longer as predominant, as valuable, as faithful as they used to be. We are in a moment of very weakened global institutions of all variety and type. We are also in a moment where the multilateral, i.e. governments coming to work together, is at its weakest than it has ever been since the inception of the first multilateral entity we know today, which is the United Nations. And we are in the moment when the traditional superpowers are no longer the sole superpower. So put all those things together and you realize why the actual moral imperative here is to collaborate across institutions, across religions, across countries, across mechanisms to pressure together. It is not fair to even argue that the United States has a moral power today on its own. It does not. And that what happened with Afghanistan showed us very, very clearly one of many, many instances where it no longer has either the hard power or the soft power if it works on its own. The truth of the matter is this is a test for multilateralism. Remember, we were here, I keep saying, we were here before with HIV and AIDS. How come we're not here now with a global pandemic? How come because the powers have shifted. The sands of our political, global way of engaging has shifted. This is part of what happens when multilateralism, which everybody poo-poos and says, oh, the UN, what does the UN do? What do these governments do? Well, look at what happens when they can't work together, when they don't work together, when it is the survival of the fittest amongst the different institutions. This is what happens. Millions die and millions more may die.
Thank you very much. Polly.
Sorry, as much as power shift has happened, I think they still countries like the United States that owns, the most wealth in the world. Like right now, 3 of their companies are producing vaccines. So I think it is the largest vaccines production right now in the entire world. So they can actually release their patterning, and save lives, billions of lives, if they were to do that. But the other thing that we are seeing is a challenge is that the WTO, even engaging the debate or the conversation about the TRIPSWaiver, looking at the text. We were given a briefing from South Africa, which is one of the co-sponsors of the proposal. And they say that there are countries like United States that are not even engaging the text itself to discuss it, to further it down, to make sure that it passes. So even that soft power that they have of engaging effectively is not happening, and that's not acceptable. And also aligning themselves with European countries that are refusing to approve the TRIPSWaiver by association or by silence, because silence is complicity. If you say that you support something and somebody else comes up and says they don't support that something, at least the minimum you can do is to stand up and say, hey, we support this. Here is the language that we are supporting, rather than saying, oh, we're going to play a neutral role to facilitate conversation. And that's what's happening in Geneva during this discussion for the TRIPSWaiver. So for me, I do not want to absolve President Biden. I still believe that he has a critical role to play. At least let the ambassador to the WTO and her team engage effectively in that conversation. And that would actually shift the conversation from what we are hearing from Geneva. Yeah, they are standing beside and letting European Union, tarnish, or rather push everybody from not approving the TRIPSWaiver is not helpful. And President Biden announcing it here, we support the TRIPSWaiver, but in Geneva, his own staff are not doing that. It's not acceptable. And it is not just President Biden, it's other presidents around the world who have said they approve the TRIPSWaiver, but they go to Geneva and they sit back and let South Africa and the 100 countries that have signed on to the proposal to fight for it on their own. If you have accepted to approve it, then fight for it. Action speaks louder than words. That's what we are calling for. So, and then when you look at who else has vaccines, it is the UK, it is China, it's Russia, it is Germany, and so the rich still, have the life-saving tools that majority of the world needs it. But I do agree with you, Dr. Karam, that we definitely have to acknowledge that the power has shifted, but it is shifting, but the wealth hasn't shifted. The wealth is still in the hands of those who have been controlling it for all these generations. And that's where it needs to change.
Thank you very much. Reverend Walker Smith, your hand is up, please.
And thank you so much again to the previous speakers and the acknowledgement to speak in this moment. I think all of the points that have been made by the previous speakers are very important. And one of those points that were made was about the shifts in the global space. Now, here we are on a Zoom platform or whatever the software platform is. And it's a global platform, yes? We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have many tools now that embolden the people's voices. When I speak of governance and I do advocacy work and we do basic advocacy 101, I always add the fourth level of governance. It's not just the presidency, the judiciary, and the legislative, it is the people's voices. And ultimately, we have a responsibility to exercise our power. Some will call it soft power as opposed to hard power, but I would argue that those things are carefully intertwined. And so moments like this speak into our people's power, for God's people to stand up and also be accountable. If we had more of the people's voices holding all of the other governance pieces accountable, we just might be in a different space. And so in this moment, where we have opportunity as people of faith to speak up, stand up, be held accountable, it is my hope and certainly my prayer that others will take their cue and do the same. Because in the end, as I said earlier, it is Ubuntu. It affects all of us. So I just want to say, I think all of this points to the role all of us need to lift up with the tools that we have and speak boldly into the moment.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Reverend Walker-Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, honored speakers, participants, press, I think I will now, as we have hit the 1 hour period, thank you all for joining. Thank everyone who spoke. Thank everyone who's participated. This was live streamed on 10 different sites. It will be posted on those sites so people can go back and see it. Once you have the posting, please pass it around. It's been a very rich, important conversation, call to action, prayer for better. And the more people who see it, the better we will be in from the bottom up. As Reverend Walker-Smith said, exercising our people power integrity. As other speakers said, moving our governments to represent our needs around the world. As Father Charlie and other people said, acting with the moral and ethical demand for the moment so that we might actually see the TRIPS waiver enacted and the shift that is necessary to ensure that there is enough production worldwide of COVID-19 vaccines, treatments, and tests to end the pandemic and to save people around the world by people around the world coming together to ensure this vital step is taken. Thank you all very much. And again, please keep the faith by passing the word. So send the link around. Thank you all.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.